Hey folks, welcome back to my channel. Today I bring to you a tale of a young woman named Masha, who found herself in a difficult situation with no money to pay for a cab ride. Little did she know that this small incident would lead to unforeseen consequences. Masha, a lovely 30-year-old woman with a slender figure and dark brown hair, had been married for a decade and was a mother of two. Before the events of this story, she believed that she was happily married and content with her life. Masha resided with her spouse and children in a small town. In the late part of July, she was tasked with a business trip to the enterprise's headquarters in Moscow. Masha's stay in the city lasted for a fortnight. After completing her work at the head office, Masha spent her last few days visiting museums and browsing beautiful stores. While she desired to purchase a lot of items for herself, she was unable to afford much. The vibrant city life and bustling crowds of Moscow had little impact on her, as she recalls. On a Friday morning, I boarded a train for my return journey from a business trip to my city. I dozed off in my compartment and woke up to the sound of the wheels clattering and the carriage door slamming shut. I got out of bed, brushed my hair, used the restroom, washed my face, and readied myself for my arrival in Moscow. During my stay in the city, I couldn't resist the urge to indulge in some shopping, so my suitcase was quite heavy. Nonetheless, I lifted it and made my way to the exit gate. All I needed to do was reach the pier and my husband would be there to meet me. I had assumed that my husband Vadim would assist me with my suitcase and drive me home from the parking lot in his car. I wondered if he would greet me with a kiss or not, and if he would perhaps bring me flowers as a welcome gesture. Perhaps we would engage in some playful intimacy in bed before he headed back to work. As for me, I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep on the train, so I would likely catch up on some rest once I arrived home. However, my thoughts were interrupted by a notification on my cell phone. I glanced at the screen and read a text message from my husband which read, "Sorry, I won't be able to meet you at the train station." My husband informed me that there was a power outage at his workplace and he had to attend to an emergency. He instructed me to find my own way home and he would meet me in the evening. I was indignant. He always had some sort of work emergency, and I couldn't believe he wasn't able to meet me at the station. I was left wondering how I would manage with my heavy suitcase. I didn't want to walk down the street in the scorching July heat, especially not in my high-heeled shoes. Perhaps I could take a cab from the parking lot instead. That seemed like a more feasible option. Taking a cab from the parking lot would be a better choice. It seemed like taking a taxi was the most sensible solution, but there was one problem. I had spent all the money I brought with me on my business trip. Despite trying to save money while in Moscow, it was difficult to do so. I only had a few coins left in my wallet, which wasn't enough to pay for a cab ride. Feeling disheartened, I decided to look for an ATM to withdraw some cash. I found one and inserted my card, but to my dismay, the machine didn't dispense any money. The screen showed that there were insufficient funds in my account. I felt increasingly frustrated as I stood in front of the ATM, wondering how my account could have been depleted. Before leaving for my trip, I had deposited half of my salary into the bank, and my husband's salary was due to come in soon. Where had all the money gone? Had Vadim been gambling at a casino? That didn't seem like something he would do. Maybe he had been frequenting bars and bringing girls back to our place while I was away. The thought horrified me, even though it had never happened before. I hadn't gone on business trips often, and this was my first time in Moscow. What was I supposed to do now? I pondered with annoyance. Despite not having enough money for a cab or private driver, I found myself lugging my suitcase through the streets on foot. I trudged past the train station and towards the taxi rank, feeling exhausted but determined to make it. As I approached, I saw several cab drivers waiting for passengers in the sweltering heat of the parking lot. I eventually hailed a cab driven by a friendly man in an old Volkswagen Polo. As he spotted me struggling with my suitcase, he quickly pulled up to the sidewalk and leaped out of the car to offer his assistance with loading it into the trunk. With his help, I was finally able to relax and enjoy the rest of my journey. He opened the door for me in a polite manner, and I warily slumped into the seat. He then proceeded to walk around the car and settle into the driver's seat. The taxi swiftly pulled out of the station so as to avoid any potential fines. "Where can I take you?" the driver asked, wearing a knowing smile. I provided him with my address. The driver appeared doubtful, perhaps thinking the distance was too far, but he didn't seem to mind and didn't charge me extra as some others might. We merged onto the highway and the car zoomed past grand mansions and summer homes. As we drove, I stole a sideways glance at the taxi driver. He was a young Caucasian man with a small black mustache. During the ride, we engaged in small talk. He introduced himself as Artem, and I went by Masha. Despite him being roughly 10 years my junior, I opted not to use his patronymic. He inquired about my destination, and I informed him that I had just returned from Moscow. I raved about how much I enjoyed the city, particularly my visit to the Pushkin Museum. He listened with a hint of sarcasm. He mentioned that he used to reside in Moscow and attended the institute, but never completed his studies. He eventually relocated to our city and had been working as a taxi driver for 2 years. Our conversation flowed seamlessly, and before I knew it, we had arrived at my destination. The cab came to a halt, and the driver gazed at me with anticipation. As he turned off the meter, I opened my wallet and searched through it for the necessary funds, only to realize that I had none left. I glanced up at the taxi driver with a sense of regret and revealed my empty wallet. "I'm sorry," I said, fluttering my eyelashes in embarrassment. "I think I must have lost all my money somewhere at the station." The cab driver appeared understanding, as if he had encountered this situation before. "What is it with you ladies, spending all your money on a business trip and then being unable to pay for a cab?" he remarked. "Well, I responded honestly. I didn't have any other options. I had to find a way to get home." I surveyed the yard hopefully, searching for a neighbor or friend who might be able to lend me the money for the cab fare. Unfortunately, luck was not on my side as the yard remained empty and I was left to face the situation alone. "So how do you plan on paying for the fare now?" the cab driver inquired coldly. "Should I call the police on you?" I felt a sense of anxiety wash over me at the thought of involving the authorities. "Please don't call the police," I pleaded. "I don't want any trouble with them." "Well, in that case, why don't we go up to your apartment or house together and you can retrieve the money to pay me there?" the cab driver suggested. I felt relieved that he was willing to work with me and not cause a scene over the unpaid fare. However, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease at the thought of bringing a stranger to my apartment. I couldn't be sure of his intentions. What if he tried to harm me? What if my husband came home unexpectedly? Even though he said he was busy at work, the rush hour might have already ended and he could be on his way back. Furthermore, I had doubts about whether we even had enough cash at home to pay the cab driver. My husband could have withdrawn all the money from our bank account for some reason, leaving us with no cash on hand. As I glanced at the meter, I realized that the fare had accumulated to a significant amount. I hadn't anticipated that the cab ride from the train station would be so costly. I rarely use cabs and wasn't aware of their current prices, but I didn't want to cause a scene or disrupt the driver's composure. Honestly, the cab driver appeared to be a pleasant man, reminiscent of my husband Vadim when I first met him 15 years ago. In fact, the driver resembled the type of men I've always found attractive. I can't quite explain it, but I felt a connection with the driver and sensed that he felt the same way. I felt the same way. I blushed and awkwardly touched his hand as he steered the vehicle. The driver had a robust, well-built arm, indicative of someone accustomed to physical labor. He chuckled slightly while looking at me and held my hand in return. I didn't withdraw or attempt to retrieve my hand, despite knowing that I probably should have. Then he leaned closer to me and abruptly kissed me with intense passion. Although I was caught off guard, I reciprocated the fervent kiss. In that moment, an indescribable connection formed between us. After a long kiss, he pulled away and we stared at each other. He appeared resolute and impassioned, while I felt a tinge of apprehension. Nevertheless, I remained composed. As his caretaker, I was aware of my responsibilities, and I knew what I was doing. "Let's move to the back seat. It'll be more comfortable," he suggested, squinting at me. "Not here," I replied. Not in front of the driveway. The whole house is watching us. The neighbors might see. Okay, let's not do it here, the driver agreed. Let's go somewhere else. I nodded in agreement, my heart racing and my breaths coming in short gasps. I thought I caught a slight grin on the man's mustached face. The driver restarted the engine, pulled out of the driveway smoothly, and turned onto two different streets. He drove until the car came to a halt in a secluded cul-de-sac that rarely saw any traffic during the day. He appeared familiar with our neighborhood as he navigated the streets with ease. The car stopped once more, and he switched off the engine, resulting in an awkward silence. The driver looked at me with expectation and asked kindly, "Is this all right?" I wanted to voice my objection at the last minute, but I lacked the courage to do so. It appeared as though I had no other choice but to accept the situation. Shouting out for help would only lead to further embarrassment, not only in terms of payment, but also for falsely implicating an innocent man in this predicament. I had willingly placed myself in that precarious situation. The events of that peculiar day had brought me to that point. I felt enraged as I thought about how my husband Vadim was to blame for it. I had been anticipating his arrival with flowers and kisses, but Vadim had an urgent matter at work that prevented him from picking me up. He expected me to find my way home from the train station alone. And to add insult to injury, he had spent all the money in our account without consulting me or informing me of his reasons for doing so. "I'll show Vadim," I thought vindictively, instantly dispelling any doubts in my head. With confidence, I nodded to the driver and opened the door. Standing up, I dusted off my dress and followed him to the back seat where there was more room. Additionally, the back windows of the car were tinted, providing me with a sense of security. I felt a sense of security that we wouldn't be seen from the street, even if someone happened to be near the car. I sensed the lustful and masculine desire emanating from him as he touched me, like a man exploring a new woman. I hadn't felt that kind of urge from my husband in a long time. How could I? After 10 years of sleeping together and having 2 children, it was a constant, comfortable feeling of having his body next to mine in bed, but nothing more. To be honest, I had been getting bored with it for a while. As the driver leaned towards me, breathing heavily and reaching out his hands, I didn't resist. Instead, on instinct, I responded by reaching out as well. It was a unique feeling, unlike anything I had experienced with my husband. I was surprised at how well I hit it off with the unfamiliar cab driver. I wasn't upset, and I wasn't afraid of getting pregnant either. I had already gotten a spiral after giving birth to 2 children. I enjoyed the experience as much as the cab driver did. As we looked at each other, he seemed pleased, and I felt a bit embarrassed but composed sitting next to him. It was time for me to leave, and I broke the awkward silence by asking if I had paid his fare. He responded with a smile, saying that I had, with no questions asked. There was no problem. I got out of the cab and stood up, adjusting my dress and stretching my legs. "Thank you," he said. "You're such a wonderful woman." "Thanks to Big Boy," I replied sarcastically, smoothing my dress and fixing my hair. "Maybe I'll see you again," he asked hopefully. I felt irritated. He had already received enough for the fare, and now he wanted more. "No, that's enough," I cut him off abruptly. "Once we've had our fun, that's it. There won't be a next time, really." It felt like I wanted to do it again, but I knew it wasn't appropriate for a respectable woman to indulge in such behavior. I had enjoyed myself once, and that was the end of it. With the maturity and awareness of a conscious woman, I vowed never to let anyone take advantage of me again. The cab driver took a deep breath, sat in his seat, closed the door, started the engine, and began moving. The cab had been parked next to my bulky suitcase in the alley. Why did I buy so much useless stuff in Moscow? I thought with annoyance. I picked up my suitcase and stumbled out of the alley towards my house. I worried that it would seem strange if someone saw me with a suitcase and asked why I was there. I managed to make it to the entrance, where I struggled to get the suitcase into the elevator and pressed the button. The elevator ascended to the 6th floor, and I retrieved my suitcase from the elevator and placed it in front of my door before ringing the bell. My husband, Vadim, was already home, having finished his rush at work. He had hurried home and was waiting for me, with a box of chocolates on the table. When I arrived home, my husband asked me where I had been. I grumpily replied that it took me so long to get there because he hadn't met me at the train station. Vadim felt guilty and rushed to hug and kiss me as if he hadn't seen me in a year. However, I was feeling lethargic after my encounter with the cab driver and didn't have the energy to respond to my husband's nervous caresses. I told him that I was very tired from the journey, dragged myself into the bathroom and stood under the shower for a long time, feeling the hot jets of water cascading over me. After showering and drying myself off, I put on my robe and headed straight to the bedroom. I lay down on the bed and told my husband that I wanted to rest for a while. Vadim didn't object and went to the living room to watch TV. As he sat there, he looked a bit sulky to me. Meanwhile, I lay under the covers, quietly sobbing and smiling, reminiscing about my adventure with the cab driver earlier that day. And that's the end of the story. Share in the comments, what do you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters? And thanks for listening to the story to the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day.